Welcome back, everybody, to Cellar Dwellers. Today, I've got my friend Christian with me, and we're here to talk about Fantastic Four First Steps, which, if I can just throw out there right away, not a fan of this subtitle at all. In today's day and age in movies, I really don't think we need it, especially when a lot of superhero movies coming out don't have it. Look at Superman, for example. It's supposed to be called Superman Legacy. Now it's just called Superman. But before we talk about our deeper thoughts into this movie, Christian, what do you think about this Fantastic Four new iteration?
Well, as I told you when we saw the movie, I think the first steps aspect was probably your one and only gripe that you had. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know we'll get into a couple other minor things later on in the episode, but if that's really the biggest issue with the movie is the secondary title, then I think it's got a lot of good things going for it. The first thing I had wrote down here was that looks like the MCU can still make a solid origin story. I know they've sort of been on let's just say a downward trajectory since the last Spider-Man movie, you can argue. So yeah, like you had some enjoyable, in all of those MCU movies that followed after Spider-Man, had a lot of enjoyable, moments and good MCU quality aspects to them, but just it definitely, they kind of lost their fastball with everything they're building towards with Avengers Endgame. And then obviously, a lot of the great stuff that we saw in Spider-Man and that we've talked about before on this. But getting back to Fantastic Four, this is a franchise that I think desperately needed to have everything go right. Because if you look at the last two attempts, they really weren't widely accepted as good movies. Not a great track record for this franchise, but the first time I saw the trailer, I got really, really excited. And my other note Pedro Pascal killed it, I think, here as Reed Richards. I really thoroughly loved all the casting choices. They had such a great, unique chemistry that I think is so crucial for these characters in particular, Fantastic Four, because they literally are a family. So if you're not buying that they're a family, then something's amiss. It's not doing its job. But I like to think that the MCU has kind of gotten back off the runway with Captain America. The new Captain America I thought was really good, and then Thunderbolts 2 thoroughly enjoyed. You can kind of get the sense that they're building towards the next two Avengers movies, and that's what I like to see.
Yeah, so I think the discussion on Pedro Pascal as Mr. Fantastic is a good jumping off point for talking about the plot of the movie as a whole. Seeing as Fantastic Four is a very solid connection between people, a family, as you said, I think the casting decisions of the Fantastic Four really worked in the long run. I'm not going to say that I was entirely sold on everything when the casting list was announced, especially Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards.
I remember you telling me that.
But I think each member of the family had a unique dynamic with every other member of the family. So the relationship between Johnny and Sue would be different than the relationship between Johnny and Ben. And that ever-changing dynamic over this, 2 hours? How long was this movie?
This movie was hour and 55 minutes.
Over the about 2 hours that this movie is, it really helps solidify these characters as family. It helps them become grounded in the script, grounded in the plot, and made it feel ultra believable. Now that sort of gets paralleled with the villains that come in, who are clearly a business relationship. But before we talk about the villains, what do you think about the family dynamic that these characters had, and then how that becomes altered by the introduction of Franklin, the kid?
Yeah, I thought with Vanessa Kirby and Pedro Pascal, two phenomenal actors in their own right. Pedro Pascal, I keep hearing a lot of people, saying kind of negatively but jokingly, he's in everything, you can't miss him. But I think that speaks to how great of an actor he is, right? Shitty actors don't get big time roles consistently, so he's clearly doing something right. And he was a great Mr. Fantastic, but I think an even better Reed Richards. And as you mentioned, I remember when we saw the trailer, you were kind of like, I don't really see it. I don't know. You weren't like saying he's gonna suck, but you weren't too sure.
I wasn't convinced.
Yeah, and man, after this movie, if you're not convinced he's like a top tier Reed Richards, then I don't know, you didn't watch the same movie I did. But Yeah, his relationship with Vanessa Kirby was top notch. Again, especially understanding that they've been at this for 4+ years, as a Fantastic Four, like that chemistry's already that much more established. They're living in the house together. And then Joseph Quinn as Human Torch, he was fantastic. I loved him in the most recent season of Stranger Things. Obviously, you don't really see the actor's face because he's the Thing, right? It's CGI, but my brother was kind of making fun of his design. I thought the Thing's design was awesome. Paid homage to what I've seen the Thing look like in a lot of the Fantastic Four comics.
I really liked the classic unibrow.
Yeah, and it wasn't like over the top, like it wasn't like tough guy, and you could kind of still see the human side of him behind the Thing. I wish we sort of saw that come out a bit more, his side, like a lot of scenes with him, walking by his childhood neighborhood and stuff. I really liked and wish we got a little bit more of that. Bottom line, that the family dynamic was superb, because I think they nailed it with the casting, and all the actors did a fantastic job. And I also like the wrinkle of them having a child in that scene when she delivers him, Franklin, in space was pretty cool to watch, and was definitely an interesting wrinkle that I know we'll probably get into a little more. I kind of want to throw it back to you, sort of back to the Pedro Pascal thing, as we mentioned. Were you satisfied with his performance here?
Yeah, totally. Vanessa Kirby as Sue Storm, as almost every news outlet is saying, it's really hard to miss. She is the heart of the movie. If you take into consideration her monologue in front of the Baxter Building, where she says, "I will not sacrifice my child for this world, and I will not sacrifice this world for my child." If you couple that with the one-on-one she has with Galactus, she is the beating heart and the pulse of this movie. There's no denying that whatsoever. Pedro Pascal as Mr. Fantastic, I would argue, is the backbone. Because in this movie, the plot really centers around his intelligence and how he's going to come up with this plan that saves the world from Galactus. At the forefront of everything that he does is certainly the survival of the planet and the survival of humanity, but the survival of his family. That dedication alone that Pedro Pascal seemingly so effortlessly conveys as Reed Richards is what holds the movie together, so that Sue Storm, the heart of the movie, can continue pushing it forward. You have people like Johnny and Ben. I'm not going to call them secondary characters, but I feel that Johnny and Ben are certainly supports for Reed and Sue, and how the dynamic that Johnny and Ben have with the rest of the characters is mostly to serve the dynamic that Reed and Sue have with the entire movie, and thus the audience. Having Franklin in the mix, as you said, wrinkles it up, complicates things. The birth scene in space was incredible. I thought it was a perfect mix of human beauty and yet wartime stress as the Silver Surfer is on their tail.
I don't know about you, but it definitely gave me 2001 vibes.
Yes, it's very 2001: A Space Odyssey. That scene in particular, and the 1960s retro futuristic style, which I think fit the vibe of the movie immaculately. Like there was no point where I thought that the style of the 1960s was shoehorned in, as it could have been so easily. Yeah,
I remember before the movie, we were talking about that, and I was sort of a bit concerned with is it 1960s style, but it's 2025, and you're like, well, maybe didn't really have an answer, but as the movie goes on, it really didn't matter.
It didn't. And furthermore, the 1960s style really made you remember that these comic book characters that Marvel has built a foundation on in the 2000s and the 2010s and the 2020s were created in the 1960s. So to just have that slight nudge of a reminder put in there, I thought was excellent storytelling prowess done by the filmmaking team. So now that we've talked about the heroes a little bit, and I think we've made our opinions pretty clear that we thought they were phenomenal, I want to talk about the villains. And I don't just mean Giganto at the beginning, although you can attest to this. I was absolutely stoked that they recreated the cover of Fantastic Four #1.
Yes. You had one of your classic Andrew nerd out moments jumping out of your...
I did, and that was really cool. I was so happy to see that. But obviously, there are two villains that are a bit more overarching than Giganto. That is Galactus and the Silver Surfer. Now, before we talk about the big man himself, Galactus, because you know I love Galactus.
Yes.
We're going to talk about Silver Surfer. Now, this Silver Surfer iteration was played by Julia Garner. Most recently, well, maybe not most recently, but pretty recently in Wolfman. Julia Garner is Shala Ball, who is a female adaptation of Silver Surfer. Quite honestly, totally fine by me. I think Julia Garner is a fantastic actress. I think she did a great job as Silver Surfer. That being said, I am not a fan of the hair.
Interesting.
I don't think I would have disliked it as much if it wasn't static. It didn't move, obviously. She's Silver Surfer. And I don't think they ever actually call her the Silver Surfer in the movie, which is fine. I mean, we know who it is. Doesn't matter.
Right.
I specifically remember my jaw dropping when you found out that she could fly at light speed. I wish we could have seen a little bit more of the Silver Surfer. I do think it would have crowded up the movie a little bit had she been there more than she was. Not only would it crowd up the movie as a whole, it would crowd up the villain scene and take some specialty away from, one, Galactus, and two, her big heroic moment at the end. So I liked the Silver Surfer, but I don't think there was a ton of the Silver Surfer to really base too many opinions on.
I think Silver Surfer was used perfectly adequate. I think she had a perfect amount of screen time. I thought Galactus kind of didn't have enough screen time. But I thought her brief origin story was, again, pretty well done. Like, we didn't need a whole, 10-minute scene about it. I honestly would have liked to see Galactus a bit more and even kind of dive into his origin more and his sort of what he saw as a connection to their child, Franklin, with that cosmic energy and entity that he embodied, that he saw. And I was also sort of concerned with the casting of a female Silver Surfer, but once you start watching it really, you don't think about it because, again, Julia Garner did an excellent job portraying the character. So that being said, with Silver Surfer, I'm sure you want to see more Galactus on the screen.
I mean, I always want to see more Galactus on the screen. I really liked that Galactus's suit on set was practical. Obviously, they would have to touch it up with CGI for moving parts like the valves on the back or the lava flowing out, and that's totally fine. The sense of dread that was conveyed through the screen when Galactus first stepped on Earth and turned around and looked at the Statue of Liberty absolutely dwarfed the Statue of Liberty. It was phenomenal. Ralph Ineson did a fantastic job. I'm so happy that he's getting these larger than life roles. He was in The Green Knight a few years ago that played sort of a similar character with like this overarching villain feel, but hanging out in the background until the very end. So clearly he's very capable of these things. I loved seeing his ship. I loved seeing him lean forward and come into frame while they were on his ship. I loved seeing him use the skyscrapers in New York as sort of walking sticks. And I mentioned it before, but the 1v1 he had with Sue Storm and Galactus getting absolutely leveled into that teleporter was phenomenal. Even though he's the one that lost, I mean, I don't know about you, but I was getting nervous in the theater that the heroes were going to lose. I remember when Galactus gets sucked into the teleporter, I realized my heart was racing because I was so invested in this movie. And even though I really liked Thunderbolts, I really liked Captain America 4, that feeling that the final fight in this movie was able to elicit from me wasn't something that was present in Captain America or Thunderbolts for me. I'm really happy that that's something that Marvel seems like they're trying to get back towards, which in hindsight makes the decision to bring back the Russo brothers and Robert Downey Jr. all that more confusing, because clearly they're gearing up to be on one of their best strings of movies in a long time. And
Yes.
To fall back on what they feel is reliable feels like they're not willing to take risks, which feels contradictory to this movie as a whole, because I felt this movie was a risk in a lot of ways, and it certainly paid off. We'll talk about it in a future video that we're planning, but to compare this to Superman, which is an even bigger risk in today's cinematic landscape. I'm really excited to talk about that with you later on, but we're coming up to the end of our time here. Do you have any closing remarks on this movie? Anything else that there's left that you'd like to say?
Well, I think it was a good point talking about Doctor Doom and obviously bringing back Robert Downey Jr. as Doctor
That's
Doom.
right, the end credit scene.
You made a really good point after the movie that the casting decision at the time was at a time when the MC was definitely at a low point and they needed
Yes.
some type of spark, sort of juice to rejuvenate it and get people excited, which I kind of thought made people more confused. So I'm really hoping that doesn't deter this franchise, and because I can totally see it becoming almost a meme where people just cannot look at Robert Downey Jr. and not see Iron Man. I hope they have their ducks in a row and have a good plan in place for Victor Von Doom, so you really focus on Victor Von Doom and Doctor Doom, and you don't just see Iron Man, Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr. Yeah, my closing thoughts is I really hope they know what they're doing, and it pays off well and it doesn't bite them in the ass.
It's interesting that you put it that way, because these last couple of movies, Captain America 4 and Thunderbolts, what I've been thinking about it after seeing it is that this is a good place to start. And I've thought the same thing about Fantastic Four. This is a good place to start. The problem is we're years, almost 2 decades into this franchise. And having a good place to start for new characters is great, but we're really working towards that payoff that's going to be Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars. I think my closing thoughts on Fantastic Four is that I absolutely love this movie. I think this was a great way to introduce new characters that can potentially be major players going forward. Great way to connect with the audience and to introduce these new themes and these new ways of storytelling for the MCU. We're really just hoping against hope that they do this right. And like I said before, it makes the decision to bring back the old favorites that much more questionable. I really hope that Marvel will learn from the last couple of years going forward and really be able to stick the landing. If they need inspiration, I would tell them to just turn around and watch their own movie in Fantastic Four.